Good afternoon, everyone. We are delighted that you're joining us for our webinar today titled, How Are Your Boys and Men Doing? The Men Healing Men and Communities Network examines the challenges facing many Black boys and men in the context of progress toward gender equality and potential practices and norms to promote greater male flourishing and agency. So I'm Marian Levy. I'm the Associate Dean at the School of Public Health at the University of Memphis. I'm delighted to moderate this panel of distinguished speakers, Dr. Gregory Washington, Dr. Jerry Watson, Dr. Randolph Potts, and Mr. Shea Langs. I will introduce them a little bit and then we'll get started. Dr. Gregory Washington will lead off. He's director of the Center for Advancement and Youth Development and a full professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Memphis. He is also a licensed clinical social worker that works as a community clinical practitioner. His research interests include risk and protective factors associated with youth development. A major goal of his scholarship is to identify and promote culturally centered group interventions that reduce risk for race-based health disparities. Dr. Randolph Potts is a licensed psychologist, in private practice in Memphis. Dr. Potts has been an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Hartford and Holy Cross College, a staff psychologist at the Memphis VA Medical Center, and has facilitated groups for people coping with advanced cancer, serious mental illness, and the traumatic death of loved ones. Shea Langs is a licensed clinical social worker who holds certifications as a master addiction counselor and clinically certified forensic counselor. He has over 20 years working in the field of mental health and juvenile justice. Over the past decade, he has worked with justice-involved veterans at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center as the Veterans Justice Outreach Coordinator. Dr. Jerry Watson is currently an assistant professor and director of the Bachelor of Social Work program at the University of Memphis. Dr. Watson has researched reentry projects in Chicago, New York, and Memphis, and worked in the field of offender reentry over the past 35 years. Dr. Watson is in the early stages of launching a reentry support group in Memphis. So right now, I would like to thank the FedEx Institute of Technology for sponsoring and hosting this webinar. And we would like to get started now with Dr. Washington.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Levy, for this invitation and opportunity to talk. Is my sound good?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Well, again, I am Dr. Washington, and I'm a full professor in the School of Social Work. I'm also the director of the Center for Advancement of Youth Development, and one of the initial founders of the Men Healing Men as a Communities Network. And so I have three esteemed colleagues that are going to talk to you today. So I do want to get out of the way and give them a chance to share, but I just want to kind of set the stage. The detailed information about the Men Healing Men Communities Network can be found on the website for the Center for Advancing Youth Development. But in essence, what happened was in relationship to the Department of Justice grant and the Defending Childhood Initiative, myself and Dr. Watson were asked to work with the team to develop some programming and training specifically related to men trauma. And we also wanted to make sure that we integrated some key information that was related to cultural identity, cultural assets, and the best evidence that we had. So that's currently what the Men Healing Men Communities Network does. We utilize evidence-based models, and we build upon our training. All of us have had state-of-the-art and pretty extensive training on models that may have a more Eurocentric origin and research that's primarily been utilized with white people or European Americans, but we also understand and appreciate the importance of integrating where necessary African worldviews, other approaches that have specifically been tailored and studied related to more vulnerable populations, more people of color. And so we integrate all of that into the work that we do. Next slide, Miriam. So the men here today, we're posing this question. How are your boys and men doing? Because we know that there's evidence to support the need to be explicit about asking that question about our males, in part due to troubling incidents of violence, incarceration, poor academic performance, and other issues. And while there's reason to be concerned about all boys and all males in the United States, the Men Healing Men and Communities Network is specifically concerned and focused on males of color, not exclusively, but specifically we target uh, those populations, those families, and those entities, particularly in the Mid-South here. And so that's where we're going to focus most of our attention today, and asking you to take a look at how are they doing, explicitly, whatever, regardless of the type of program that you're involved with, whether it's independent or whether it's more family oriented. What do you know about how they're doing? One of the things that influences us is our understanding about race-related stress. And this is very relevant for boys and men of color. Are we aware of the structural racism that exists internally in these institutions that we work with? One in the University of Memphis, for example, is not immune from that. We got a chance to work with Dr. Levy on some work around dismantling institutional racism. One of my main issues was that there hasn't been an African American male uh, dean at the University of Memphis for over 20 years. So things like that happen when we don't pay specific attention to how our institutions are structured. That's significant for the students here. Also, there's collective experiences of racism that impact individuals, particularly for males, African American males. There's stereotypical portrayals or just skewed portrayals of African American boys and men, and these things impact them. They impact them over time. Also, the legacy that they understand about how boys and men have been treated in the United States. This comprehensive portrayal, in addition to what's going on right now today in Minnesota, in Chicago, in Memphis, and what these young men are experiencing. Uh, the trauma and the emotional distress cannot be ignored. It does have an impact. Next slide, Miriam, Dr. Levy. And so we understand poverty is a major influence. We understand poverty impacts African Americans disproportionately. Memphis is no is very much impacted by poverty. One of the things that we understand is when you have communities impacted by poverty, there's an increased risk of psychological distress. One of the things the research tells us that when we're talking about Blacks in the United States, they most frequently talk about feelings of sadness and hopelessness. These feelings, these thoughts are related to some very troubling rates of suicide among African American men. Among men in general, again, but African American men also, and kind of disproportionately related to their feelings of sadness and hopelessness. Next slide, Marion. Um, so one of the things that we do is in the network is we try to be clear that we want to be of service by helping address some of the issues related to race-based mental health disparities. How can we help eliminate them? One of the things we want to do is continue to provide training. Dr. Watson and I and a former colleague, um, Dr. Lamar, and also some of our students have worked to provide what we call rites of passage training that also incorporates evidence-based trauma reduction. One of the other things we do is try to work with individuals and institutions to help them understand their bias and reduce the impact of bias. We talked about institutional racism and systematic racism, but another significant thing that one of my colleagues would talk about is how do we help providers who are interested in working with this population be more prepared to do that? We want to increase the number of racial and ethnic minority providers who directly impact boys and men, but we know that that is a daunting task, and that is why we use a lot of group interventions. But the reality is that providers who are not Black or who are not Hispanic can do excellent work and do excellent work with Black boys and men, but they do need specific training and support around that. And we think that we can be helpful in that regard. Next slide, Miriam. So one of the things, this is some information that was provided by my colleague, Dr. Leon Caldwell, through his work with the Philanthropic Partnership for Black Communities. And one of the things I'm just going to emphasize is that we're acutely aware that we have to address boys and men at the developmental level where they present. And from there, we can understand the risks that is there, and we can focus on trying to emphasize protective factors that are relevant to that level of development. For example, in early adolescence, one of the things that's a risk is what I've mentioned before: negative media influences, negative portrayals of young Black men. One of the things that we do in our work at the network is we try to integrate more accurate media images, more positive media images, utilizing youth culture. It's important that when we do this work that we have individuals who can be code switchers and can communicate directly to youth. But also we try to communicate very accurately historical context of people of African descent far before the transatlantic slave trade, and the brilliance and the inclusion of cultural structures that was provided by ancient African civilizations, in addition to those African Americans who contributed to the construction of the United States society. Next slide, Dr. Levy. So one of the things, another slide provided by Dr. Caldwell, is that we operate with an understanding that if our boys are developing in toxic situation, toxic water, if the systems are not prepared to promote their development, if there's not enough resources economically, if school systems are operating from a premise where they don't understand trauma, where they don't understand poverty, if caregivers and peers don't have enough information and resources, that can be a toxic environment. Next slide, Dr. Levy. What we want is an environment that's more nurturing. We want one that includes, thank you, that includes the type of economic resources that increasingly we have to kind of work for and provide, also more culturally responsive services. Again, the network tries to be a resource for providers, institutions, and systems who want to be more responsive of the unique needs. Next slide, Dr. Levy. So one of the things that's important is that we utilize the wisdom from the elders. Dr. Carl Bell, a psychiatrist, did fantastic work. He's now an ancestor, but he did fantastic work in Chicago with community-based mental health. Talked about rebuilding the village. One of my colleagues who has passed on did fantastic work around understanding youth culture, utilizing rap and hip hop and integrating that into therapeutic work with Black males. Another impressive elder, Asa Hillard, a lot of his work talks about how you access and emphasize African heritage. Dr. Nancy Boyd Franklin, and locally, Dr. Teresa Kumbawa is a tremendous asset in regards to her work with rites of passages of youth and adults. Next slide. And I'm done. I have to be quiet. Ursula's telling me. This is an example of the work that we do, a drumming circle. I look forward to get back in the community doing this work. But at this point, we're going to turn over to Dr. Watson. So, Dr. Watson, are you there?
I'm here. Can you move the slides forward?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Watson, the director of the Bachelor's of Social Work program at the University of Memphis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about offender reentry, or African-American men in particular returning home from prison or being released from prison. There is an urgent need for offender reentry and social support services. And as you'll see, as we go forward, and I may freeze because I'm seeing something flashing on the screen that my internet is unstable. And at any rate, we live in a time when there's been a great deal of incarceration, particularly of African-American men. And as a result of which, you can fast forward the slide. Each year, there's over 10,000 prisoners released, like 670,000 people incarcerated, 650, this one says, anywhere from 650 to 670,000 prisoners released every year. I think it's 10 every week. That's from state and federal prisons. Tell, what about all of the African-American men that are being released from the county and city jails, which are prisons nonetheless? But that creates some issues around how can you stay out of prison? How do people stay out of prison? But there are figures, you can continue with the slides. There are figures that show that fairly regularly these are being rearrested and reincarcerated. They've got figures for 3 years, 1 year, 3 years, 7 years. And after about 7 years, it's up around 70 to 80% of the men that were in prison are back in prison again. Now, one of the things that happen is, of course, most of the times when men are released from prison, they return to the same impoverished neighborhoods that they left when they went to prison. And this is very often a recipe for disaster. That space, that environment, including the people that are there, problems. Now, many, many years ago, Angela Davis, one of our queen mothers in the African-American Revolution, said that prisons do not disappear social problems, disappear human beings. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from public view when the human beings contended with them are relegated to cages. And so prisons, most often, they don't really solve social problems. They just make people disappear for a while, but the social problem is still there. Go forward, please. And so one of the things that I've done as part of Men Healing Men and Communities Network is to do research and practice in reentry work. I'm actually on the Community Advisory Board for the Federal Community Actions Facility in Memphis. It's called Dismas Charities. And a lot of people don't know about it, but you have federal prisoners coming from all over the United States to Memphis from prison, directly from prison to a community location in Memphis, which is really still the prison. It's a community corrections center ran by a faith-based organization. And that's common across the United States. The federal government has been trying for years to do something about the reentry issue, but with very little success. And so as I've studied and participated in these reentry groups, I've noticed that some of them are quite a bit more successful in terms of helping people to stay out of jail. And little did we know that they're also changing policies around incarceration and reentry. And so what we're doing is here in Memphis, we've started a reentry support circle. And that the idea of the circle is an ancient idea, can be found in Africa, can be found right here in the United States amongst the original people here, the Arapaho, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Apache. They all use circles, as well as our African nation used the Akan, the Igbo, the Yoruba, and the Maasai. They all use circles to solve problems that individuals had, that families had, and that the community and nation had. They use circle work. And now, see, it's catching in Memphis around restorative justice circles. You'll see some of those. And I actually facilitate and train facilitators, even now for the past 3 years in Chicago, on doing restorative works with community members and, of all people, police. And
4 minutes,
so,
Watson.
how many minutes?
4.
Okay, so this is the framework for my reentry support circles. We use cognitive behavioral therapy, emotional intelligence to help with self-awareness, emotional regulation, and we use self-help and mutual aid groups. Some of the principles, they really work. We've studied Alcoholics Anonymous, the main self-help group, and we also use credible messengers. And these are people that have had prison experience and have also had success in remaining crime-free. And we use that circle framework to meet. And of course, you might imagine the COVID virus has created some problems, but we're still going online. And I meet with groups in Long Island, New York, Chicago, Indiana, as well as Memphis. Next slide. Okay, so this is how we do it. We join, we support, we train, we advise, we teach, we learn, we develop programs, we evaluate, we partner. And so Men Healing Men, we do all sorts of work to address the reentry problem. The barbershop talks, Doc missed that one, but we do the barbershop talks, rites of passages training. And so with that, I'm gonna pass to the next presenter. Thank you. Oh, you can join us if you like every other week. You can reach me through the university website, and I will forward this material to you. Thank you.
Mr. Langs, do you want to share your screen?
Yes. All right, give me. Good midday. My name is Shea Langs, and I'm going to be talking about the engagement of African American males, adolescent males in mental health services. One of the things you need to understand about the disparity is that what is the result when they are, able to engage in mental health services. One of the biggest barriers is access to care. If you're coming from a lower social, economic, position in life, your insurance primarily would be Medicaid compared to a first tier insurance, where you may have some providers saying, hey, I don't accept Medicaid. A lot of treatment services from community agencies may not have licensed professionals. They may have somebody that may have a master's degree in sociology and that degree does not result into a license, but that's the only master's degree person they have. Always, with these factors can lead to lower engagement in the treatment. This is from more study that with client disengagement from mental health services, it presents a significant obstacle to recovery and symptom improvement. Quite naturally, if one will not engage in service, how can you show that they will have progress? If I don't attend the service, or I don't find the service beneficial, why would I continue to attempt to participate? And a lot of times with dealing with community mental health, there's a high level of no-shows, cancellations for services, probably over 50%. I find this slide very interesting when we talk about client-therapist match. I know that some of the providers and some of the people that join on this webinar may be providers themselves, that they say that as long as the therapist is competent, that's all that matters, and the client will be okay. One of the scenarios I wanted to draw is, okay, if that's true, do you think that a male therapist is suited to deal with a woman dealing from a victim of sexual assault? The answer would be no. The preference is going to be somebody that is same gender. So one of the things about when the client and therapist meet, they are going to assess for those specific dimensions like race, okay, gender, age, and ideology. A lot of times that African-American adolescent males do not come in contact with a therapist that is of the same race. So what do? They have to assess effectiveness. How effective is this therapist going to be? Is this therapist the same gender? And what is the age? All these things are important to developing that therapeutic rapport. The biggest thing is, I can't say effectiveness is effective therapist is going to be better than a therapist that may be same race, gender, age, but those are factors that factor in. As we take a look at this slide, as Dr. Washington discussed about, the developmental stages of clients and stuff that, with female adolescents, they may be more expressive, as the female is able to communicate more about their feelings. Whereas males, the only feelings of expression that have been taught by the environment to express are feelings of anger, because that's something that's socially accepted in their environment that is also reinforced. But when being a therapist, when you can directly address these feelings of anger, also take a look at alienation. Well, at this stage of life, they're kind of a little lost. They don't know where they are going, what they're going to be. You have issues dealing with role identity, confusion, and they tend to lack on to peer role models, those that are trying to emulate other role models, which may be older and questionable. Where do they get this information from? The environment. The environment is always speaking. to that individual. It speaks to all of us. The environment is telling them, go, this is how you behave. This is how you interact. So as these peers reinforce, negative behaviors, that may be a barrier to when they first meet with a therapist. And I know I posted in this last webinar, we talked about what it means to be a Black man.
4 minutes, Mr. Langs.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Washington. Role identity is very, very important. I know people will say, hey, I've got an idea what it is to be a Black man. I have a Black friend, or I have a Black son, or my husband is Black, but you're not a Black man. Meaning that this thing that Dr. Washington spoke about, he talked about racial trauma. It's real. It's real. If you've been traumatized at an early age and stuff based on color, and you experience other traumas and stuff, your defenses are going to be up. But when you are able to address or empathize with feelings of anger, being alienated, or what it is to be a Black man, youth are more likely to engage in the process. The last slide is when African-American males are engaged in the therapeutic process, just like with anything, when you build a therapeutic rapport, they take a more active role. They talk more freely. They're open to explore feelings and experiences. These are the things that you know that are you being successful. Dr. Levy?
Yes, sir.
I can stop screen share.
Okay. And let me share my screen again. Let's see. Let's go down. Can you all see the screen? Let's see.
Yes, we can see the slide is
I'm trying to get the full screen. Do I have it now?
yes, you do.
Okay, let me get to.
Okay, I think you want to go back up right there. Is that your beginning slide?
Dr. Potts? Dr. Potts, you ready?
I am.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Levy. Greatly appreciate it. And thank all of you for inviting us to participate and to present at this important event. The next slide is from the 2020 Tennessee Men's Health Report Card, produced by the Center for Research on Men's Health at Vanderbilt. As you see in this slide, the leading cause of death for men in West and Middle Tennessee in 2020 were heart disease and cancer. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you as public health researchers and students and professionals. And you're probably very aware of the contributing factors to this cause of death for men in our area: the behavioral, and the social, the dietary, but also the environmental impact of places like the Valero refinery and the military defense depot and other Superfund sites that are disproportionately located in Black communities. What struck me though is the next slide. What the top cause of death by men 18 to 34 in our area were different. Suicide accounts for more deaths than heart attack and cancer combined for this group. Striking because these deaths are largely preventable with mental health services. We also see that there are more deaths due to homicide and assault than heart attacks and cancer combined for this age group. And a particularly important concern for African American men, because African American men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide than African American women, primarily because they use more lethal means to take their lives. It's also a major concern because less than half of all Americans generally with a mental disorder get the treatment that they need. But Black Americans who need mental health services are half as likely to receive those services, and then Black men even less likely than Black women. So we have a particular problem in making sure that Black men get mental health services generally, and then the quality mental health services that are needed is even more of a struggle. And Dr. Levy, can we look at the next slide where we see Mr. Rashid, for an example. Now, being a war veteran, as you see in the description, we also know that he's even at greater risk for suicide than Black men who are already at an extremely high risk for suicide. And men like Mr. Rashid, who are experiencing symptoms of depression, are often seen by healthcare providers, friends, and family as more irritable or angry rather than sad. And like Mr. Rashid, many men when depressed may present with fatigue or loss of interest or insomnia or other physical complaints, gastrointestinal pain, headaches. And many men are more likely to see a physician about these symptoms, these physical symptoms, than emotional symptoms. But that may be a place where there also should be a screening for depression, for PTSD, for those mental health issues that the male patient, the Black male patient, might be less likely to talk about. In addition to the institutional barriers to getting mental health services, barriers to seeking treatment also include the mistrust of mental health professionals and health professionals generally, as my colleagues have mentioned, not wanting to be misunderstood or not wanting to be seen as weak or as crazy as they fear they might be labeled. And these are important barriers. There's also the issue, as Mr. Langs pointed out, and Dr. Washington, the lack of Black providers. How many of you can name one male Black psychologist practicing, other than me, practicing in Memphis? Name one male Black psychologist practicing in Memphis that you can refer a client to. I don't think any of you present can. I challenge you. Less than 2% of the members of the association, of the American Psychological Association, APA, are Black. Less than 2%. Yeah, less than 2% of APA members are Black, which means much less than 1% are men who are Black. There's not only a lack of Black providers, but as Dr. Washington points out as one of the barriers, a lack of providers with the training and knowledge base for treating Black men. The lack of appropriate training tools. Well, what extra do you need to provide quality care for Black men? Dr. Levy, can we look at the next slide? Because that's the question, as Mr. Langs asked. Being open-minded, knowing evidence-based practices, what more do I need to know in order to provide effective services for Black men? Do I need to know about African history and culture? Do I need to know about the history of racism in Memphis? What else do I need to know? Let's go to the next slide. Well, yeah, is that it? Yeah, good, yeah. Mr. Rashid, in the example, identifies racism as his major problem, not depression, not PTSD, not lung cancer, which he possibly has. Now, how to understand that response? Is that just hyperbole? Is that just an expression of anger? Is he just externalizing his inner turmoil? How do you understand that statement that racism is my main problem? Or his saying, I don't want to be a guinea pig, therefore I won't take the medications you're prescribing. How to understand that fear? Is that resistance to treatment, as it will probably be described? Is he paranoid? If you've been trained in an evidence-based trauma therapy, would you say that's just irrational thinking associated with trauma? Or if you've been trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, is that a cognitive distortion? Is he overgeneralizing all medical treatments based on the Tuskegee experiment? Does he have a problem cognitively that we need to overcome? Or could it be that he's already been exposed to medical experimentation here in Memphis? He was born at John Gaston Hospital, as were most people who are Black, born in 1953, which is when he was born. Maybe he's already been a subject of medical experimentation there because babies born there were subject of medical experimentation and at John Gaston Hospital by the University of Tennessee. So it could be that he's already endured experimentation, maltreatment. Perhaps he's making reference to his history of, as we see in the slide here, racial trauma. And as Mr. Langs pointed out, that's a real thing. It is a public health problem. So it's important to know how racial trauma has impacted his life and your client's life. And Dr. Levy, can we look at the next slide? Because racial trauma, historical trauma, can have an important psychological, behavioral, and medical impact on the client. The client may have already been exposed to medical experimentation, toxic exposure, police violence, other painful experiences that may be relevant in providing care. And Dr. Levy, can we look at the next slide? Because it's very important to consider that Black African history is not just a source of trauma. Black African culture and history are sources of healing. And it's very important, as Dr. Washington pointed out, for example, Professor Asa Hilliard has made the case in so many ways and in so many presentations and writings that within African history are solutions to the problems we face. The problems of mental health, medical problems, social problems. Dr. Levy, can we look at the next slide? One example. There are many translations of the writings of Tahotep, one of which is by Dr. Asa Hilliard. In the writings of Tahotep, 4,000-year-old text, there are several chapters on preventing violence at the interpersonal level, how we relate to one another, and at the societal level, in terms of how society is structured and how resources are allocated. So even here, this discussion of social violence, oppression, injustice, and interpersonal violence, injustice. And Dr. Levy, can we go to the next slide? Frantz Fanon, a Black psychiatrist, political philosopher who practiced and published and fought for social change in the 1950s, addressed the psychological, social, and cultural consequences of racism and oppression. And he too explained this relationship between what he called vertical violence, the violence of health disparities, the violence of police violence, the violence of discrimination, vertical violence coming down on our heads, and horizontal violence, the community violence, the homicides, the internecine violence, and how the two are connected. They're related. through that process of dehumanization, of devaluation of Black lives that we witness every day perpetrated against Black people, and that's perpetrated within our own community. He talks about that relationship, but beyond that, how to move from being patients and victims to being social actors, that taking action for social change is psychologically liberating for the client, for the practitioner as well.
1 minute, Dr. Potts.
Okay, next slide, please. So there are also an abundance of African symbols and principles. Dr. Watson talked about principles in the circle being therapeutic and empowering. Wouldn't it be great if some of these African principles were also the basis of therapies? And Dr. Levy, can we look at the next slide? They are. There are therapies based on each of these sets of African principles. They aren't often taught, though, to those therapists. So yes, there are a lack of training tools for our therapists. And in conclusion, tapping into that cultural and spiritual history of healing and all, we may be successful in healing men in our community. Thank you.
Excellent presentation. Very, very nice. Are there any questions? I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Oh, here's some references. And here's contact information for our presenters, the email addresses. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we'll see if there's any questions. Dr. Washington, you want to look at the chat?
Yes, I did want to share that we have added in the chat the email address for contacting the Men Healing Men and Communities Network, in addition to our own emails that were identified on the contact sheet. We also in those slides identify, in addition to the many resources that my colleagues have provided, we also provided a list of organizations that could be helpful for those who are interested in learning more and who are interested in wanting to collaborate and do the work. I don't see specific questions. I do see comments. I'm confirming. Yeah, some of the topics. I will add one more thing that some of our colleagues talked about, particularly Dr. Potts and Dr. Watson, is this whole idea of culture as a healing resource. And one of the things, one of the early slides you saw, the drums, that one of the things that we embrace, the networks embrace, the spirit of using expressive arts like drumming. Gabriel Horn has a book, Spirit of Drumming, but we use a lot of African-centered drum, expressive arts, martial arts, and there have been specific interventions, particularly that Mr. Langs and I have done that have included martial art and video games, particularly for young males. The male brain is different, and you've heard that the psychology. It's important to understand a little bit about Black psychology, and Black psychology is different, and males are different. So we just emphasize the inclusion of interventions that understand Black psychology, understanding the development of the males, but also understand under what contexts they would best flourish and engage in therapeutic resources.
There's a question from Renee Green. Are there any work being done with women who've been incarcerated, for Dr. Watson?
Yes, actually, there is a women's social support group that Amiable Families of Incarcerated Men that they facilitate. So if you contact me, I'll put you in touch with them, and when they meet, I want to also just kind of chime in and state that while it wasn't in the diagrams, that the the support groups, the reentry circle support groups that I've seen that appear to be successful in helping men to remain crime-free and to change some of the policy laws related to incarceration and records. And they've been organizations that really are heavily involved with African-centered culture, utilizing symbols, utilizing the Nguzo Saba, some values that come out of Kwanzaa, naming the organization. In fact, we're in the process now of naming our group here in Memphis. And thus far, we're Sankofa, Akko, I believe it's Akko Fin, Akko 10, the Double Sword, Sankofa, and I think it's Akofina. But we've got 4 symbols and 4 names that we're working with. And it process, and some of this information is really sacred information for Africans, and we hold it dear to our heart, and it helps men to develop new value systems, new meaning. Because when you think about it, if you're involved in a street gang, you have a full culture, colors, symbols, values, names, the whole works. And we believe that once men join these reentry circles that are African-centered, it is from that circle, we believe that people develop their identity from the group that they are connected to. We also believe that people have 3 basic needs: to love, to be loved, and to belong to something that's greater than them. And so we create that. We create a safe space. And that's one of the exciting things about the work that we're doing. It's fresh, it's new, it hasn't been done here in Memphis, and we're really building it.
And we have a question from Dr. Jabose Akumabwa. Where do we go from here? How do we reach populations in need and promote access to mental health services? A great question.
I might add that one of the different things about Indomitable Families is that they do have a clinical connection. They provide clinical mental health services at Indomitable, which is a little bit different than the other reentry groups that I've been associated with. They actually provide mental health services. And so again, through Men Healing Men and communities, we have that relationship. And that's a little different from the other groups that I've seen. While some of them use cognitive behavioral therapy, the group out of Long Island, New York, they're named the Council on Thought and Action. And they use a cognitive behavioral approach. But ours is an integrated approach. We use a therapeutic approach, clinical mental health, but we're also heavily involved with culture, because really when you take a people's culture from them, they don't have mental health. They don't have nothing. And so we have to work on rebuilding that piece as a part of rebuilding mental health and healing.
Let me address Dr. Akumbawa's question. Dr. Akumbawa is one of my mentors and a great supporter of the work. And we've done work together. He and his wife, Teresa, in regards to rites of passage work in connection with working with young people. And so one of the things, Dr. Kumawa, that we're looking to do is to continue this dialogue with elders and continue to provide additional opportunity for providers who want to do this kind of work with boys and men. So we will be announcing later in the summer the beginning of a series of first planning and dialogues with the elders. You will definitely be invited, and those others. There's a group of elders who contributed to the strategic plan for the initial unveiling of Men Healing Men Communities. We want to see how many of those brothers want to continue to be involved in Men Healing Men Communities 2.0. And I know I keep saying brothers, but also women are an important part of the network. And so we will be reaching out too. And so one of the things that we're available to do right now by contacting us, we're able to try to be available to those who are looking for resources, particularly as they do their own work with men and boys, and also who need direct providers right now. So the short answer is we're trying to continue to go back and conceptualize this network as an active entity that can be utilized. So we will be in touch with you, Dr. Akumbawa, and we will continue the dialogue.
And I'll remind everyone that this presentation, the slides and the recording will be available at the FedEx Institute of Technology at the website. The website is memphis.edu/FedEx/events/telehealth.php. And that's in the chat box. Ramilote put it in the chat box too. So all these slides, this presentation will be available to after the presentation.
I know there's one request from Chicago wanting to contact us regarding an African sit-in drumming circles that's being established in Chicago. And of course, Dr. Watson and Dr. Potts, we have strong connections to Chicago. And we would definitely love to collaborate regarding that work. I'm actually also working with another colleague, Dr. Susan Ellswick, around our work in using drums and expressive arts in dealing with trauma in youth. So there may be some additional training locally here. And that's important because, again, as was mentioned, we want to work with whoever is willing to do the work around helping promote the healthy development of boys and the healing and development of men. And you don't have to be an African-American male to do that work. And we believe that we have something to offer to those who are interested in helping that population. And so we're looking to collaborate with others who bring their own experiences and strengths to the table.
Do the presenters have any final thoughts they want to share with the group?
Thank you, everyone, for participating and attending. Thank you.
One item, that data, that statistic on the excessive rate of suicide, we all can play an important role. Ask the person you're talking to, had they ever thought, or had they recently thought of taking their life? That question can save their life.
Yeah, I think the other thing, kind of in addition to that, is there a way for you to contribute to safe spaces for particularly for Black men to have discussions around the things that is difficult for them to talk about? There are groups, and if you're interested in therapeutic groups, providers, that's an important resource to have for men to have opportunities. Some of you are familiar with our work with Barbershop Talks. We will be doing that work again. We're looking to do the planning later this summer also to begin that work with our community organizations. So I would just ask you to stay in touch with us. Dr. Levy, I want to thank you much for your for providing this platform for your support and your leadership in integrated health wellness clinic. And I look forward to contributing this to that entity, you know, specifically this piece around boys and men, and very specifically Black boys and men. I want to thank my colleagues who are all busy gentlemen. You know, they're all, they have a special place in my heart. And I want to thank them very much for taking me up on this invitation to be involved. It means a lot to have them around me. So guys, we'll be in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
I think that concludes our session today. Thank you to Dr. Washington, Dr. Potts, Mr. Langs, and Dr. Watson. Thank you.
Thank you.